Okay, so just so we're all clear on today's session. So today's session is very much talking about 10 reasons why Salesforce users love Sage Intacct. So this is very much primarily geared up on sort of the technical behind the scenes look at how the integration works, as well as going through some of the options in terms of processes and integration points, because we all know that Salesforce is so very customizable. Depending on how your Salesforce is set up, you may decide to use the integration with Intacct in different ways. And one of the things I always like to mention is that that is one of the exciting things about working with this connector, is that it's flexible. So initially you may start with the opt to invoice workflow, but then as you grow and you want more control over your subscriptions and your contracts, you could turn on that workflow or have things running in parallel. So just to introduce myself, my name is Hannah Monroe. I'm Managing Director and Transformation Lead here at ITAS. So we are, for those that don't know, we are a financial transformation consultancy who actually specialize in Sage technology. So for us, Sage is a tool, and Intacct is one of my personal favorites because of its flexibility and its integration with Salesforce. We've won multiple awards for Sage. So we're actually Sage Intacct Partner of the Year. So very proud of that one, as well as Sage 200 Online Partner of the Year. High growth. And there's a few others in that list. I'm not going to go through them all today. I've actually spent personally, so just to introduce myself, so I've actually worked with Sage products for well over 10 years now. Everything from 200 through to Intacct. And Intacct is definitely my speciality nowadays. But I've also, one of the products I work with actually sat on the Salesforce platform. So, I passed all my Salesforce administration exams and I've worked a lot with the platform. So hence why I'm taking you guys through this presentation. So let's actually get into the meat of things. Let's understand some of the pieces. So what is the Advanced CRM Integrator? So firstly, the Advanced CRM Integration is a managed package that we install onto Salesforce. So it is built and managed by the Sage team, who are a Salesforce developer. So there's no need for any third-party connections to actually manage the integration between the two. What that also means is, because it's built and supported by the Sage team, is that obviously as things upgrade, either on the Sage or the Salesforce side, it will work seamlessly together. So we can push through. Obviously, we get access to the early upgrades for the early releases for Salesforce, but we can and then push through any updates that are needed to be compatible with those upgrades. Also, as it's a managed package, custom objects and components may not count against your org limits, depending on the licensing module you're on. And of course, from a security aspect, Sage have to go through Salesforce's very stringent security and functionality reviews as well. So there are some real advantages to the fact that this is a connector. It also means that it's quite quick to deploy, right? As integrations go, you'll hear people say, oh, we're going to take months, or even years, some of them, to actually build out and do a connection. But because it's an out of the box connector with flexibility and configuration options, it means that we can deploy it very, very quickly and adapt it to suit your individual requirements. So one of the big things about Intacct is it's real-time sync. So this doesn't run overnight and you have to wait for the next day to see data in real time. It's actually a live connection, and I'm going to show you some of those live connection points. So we are always in sync. We're pushing data in both directions between the two systems, and we're managing that sync process. So no need for any nightly synchronization jobs, if I can get my words out. We also have what we call smart sync. Okay, so one of the challenges can often can be, do I have to push stuff through all the time? No, you don't. We only sync the field when the fields that Intacct is using are updated. Yeah, so that's what our smart sync function is. And also, we use the APIs. So it's been well designed in the back end. We're making the most of the bulk APIs if we need to do large operations as well. Okay. So for those of you that haven't explored the connection between Intacct and Salesforce yet, we actually have a number of different integration workflows. Okay, so and I'm actually going to talk you through. So we have opt to invoice or sales order, we have opt to contract, We have opt to project, so we do have to connect into the project functionality with Intacct, and we have Salesforce to Journal. So the Salesforce to Journal is mostly used with the NFP version of Intacct, though there are some uses for it outside of that as well. But that's who it's been designed for and used for. Okay, so let's have a look at some of those flows. So our opportunity to invoice flow. So firstly, what do we sync? So we push accounts. So accounts in Salesforce become customers in Intacct, and we can push those through. And then products in Salesforce become items within the Salesforce solution. From an opportunity, you can create a sales order, or you can create a sales invoice as a note, but that will then create a sales invoice back in Salesforce. So we're not just pushing it in one direction, we're actually holding that invoice record in both systems. And there's a couple of reasons for that. To do that. So you don't need to create these objects. These objects get created as part of that managed package that I talked about earlier, but that is in the system. And then what we have the ability to do is, obviously, if you're using your bank fees to automatically pull in payments and match them against invoices, once that invoice is paid, the invoice in Salesforce gets marked as paid. So you can look at that invoice, you can see that invoice within the system, within Salesforce, and you can see whether there's an outstanding amount, because very often the salesperson will take responsibility for chasing that. The next option we have in terms of workflow is our opportunity to contract workflow. So this is a bit more complex. So a contract in our eyes is when there's a recurring commitment from the customer. So we can do recurring sales invoices as a note or sales orders, but actually the contract module within Intacct allows you to separate out the actual billing schedule with the revenue recognition schedule. It's also got options in terms of usage-based billing and expense recognition as well. So if you're a subscription business, one of the first conversations we'll have with you is, are we going down the contracts route, or are we going to use the recurring invoices and RevRec capabilities? And there are some differences. So if you're interested in exploring that, definitely check out our videos on the contracts module, or touch base with us and we can go through that in more detail. But the flow from Salesforce perspective is that from an opportunity, you would add your items onto that opportunity, and then you press a button and create a Salesforce contract. Now that Salesforce contract, on that Salesforce contract, there is a button that will allow you to create a contract within Intacct with all of the relevant revenue recognition and billing schedules. So that pushes all the way through. And then once your contract is through to Intacct, we actually sync it back. So you actually have an object within Salesforce called Sage Intacct contract lines. Yeah, so you can see what's coming through. And again, that system, as you update things in Intacct, so maybe something changes and you need to tweak something, that information is synced back. Now, what the Salesforce process can also do is manage sort of upgrades or add-ons and renewals. So from that contract in Salesforce, you can create a add-on opportunity if you want to add new modules. And again, once you save that, it will add it back into the original contract. And then from within Intacct on renewal, maybe you 3 months, normally it's about 2 or 3 months before renewal, you can set it so that it automatically creates a renewal opportunity in Salesforce. So you have that full life cycle that is managed between the two. The Sage Intacct is handling the financial aspect of your contracts, but Salesforce is geared up and synced to manage the sales aspect. So your account managers have all the information they need in terms of what contracts are sitting on that customer. They can see what invoice has been generated, what's been paid, and your sales team can manage, and obviously your account managers may manage the add-ons and renewals as well. So all of that information is in there, and you have a shared version of the truth in terms of what is happening with that contract. Now, in Intacct itself, it's then managing and automating your revenue recognition schedules. So on each line of the contract, you can have different revenue rec. You can split out between your deferred but not paid, etc. on that contract. And you can ongoing generate, depending on the type of line and its billing schedule, you can generate the invoices and send those out to customers automatically as part of your billing routines. And again, those same invoices get pushed back to Salesforce so that all that information sits in there. And as those invoices are paid, they sit within that system. So it's a very integrated profile, lots of integration points, particularly with contracts. But again, remember we have the multiple different types of workflow. And then for those that are using the not-for-profit version of Salesforce, we do have the option to trigger journals versus transactions. So if you're managing the collection of donations within Salesforce, we can trigger the push through of the donation amounts so that you're not having to export and then import as part of that selection. Again, there's flexibility, like we can utilize all of the elements within Intacct in terms of dimensions, but I will come on to that a little bit later. Okay, so just at the top level, let's also, we're going down our reasons. So one of the big reasons that people, Salesforce administrators in particular, like Salesforce, working with the Salesforce module within Sage Intacct, is the fact that we actually sync a lot of data, right? So we're not just taking the top level information, we're actually syncing across things like price books and products or items, as we call them in Sage Intacct. We have, the ability to sync invoices, projects, contracts, and also payments as well. So there's lots of integration points. And behind those, we're actually syncing other information like dimensions, like billing schedules, etc. So there's a lot of data that gets shared across the two systems in the background to prevent any issues with like pushing data across. So it's not just the main objects we work with, but actually behind it is a whole selection of like what I call sub-objects that we sync across between the two. And again, that's all managed through the managed package. We just turn it on and sync it across. So we talked a lot about the different processes, and depending on how you want to work, you can actually trigger the stages in the processes from either buttons or workflow. So what do I mean by that? So again, if you can see on the screen, you'll notice that if when we go on the account, we can actually see a drop down. On the opportunity, we can see a drop down. So we can create a sales order and pop the Intacct Screens from within Salesforce, or we can use the Salesforce workflows and at closed won stage, create the transaction. So you you are in control over at what point and how you trigger the process, whether that's an invoice or whether that's a contract. So, and the nice thing about it is because the screens have been designed for order entry, it makes it easy. So if you decide to use the button to create an invoice, it will map everything in and pre-populate the fields, including products, including prices from your opportunity item. And then it's just down to your team to review that if you're going for the manual method, if they want to add anything in or check it out. Or you can, a lot of people do this, is they'll just have they'll have the closed won status, and then in the background, it just pushes across to Intacct, and then Intacct will send the final transaction back into the system so they can see it synced. So again, you have a lot of flexibility about how you use and how you trigger the system. We also have inbuilt chatter synchronization. So in this example, I've got a sales invoice both in Salesforce and in Intacct, and then I can actually put commentary on that invoice on either side, and it will push automatically through. And we're not just limited to invoices. Any of the objects that are synced, i.e. accounts, contracts, can be dealt with in this same way. So you can actually sync across the chatter feeds. And a lot of our finance users will use that chatter tool, not just for communicating with the Salesforce users, but also internally as part of their collaboration suite. Number 7, so we've got, so not only can we sync and push information back and forth, but we can actually run Sage Intacct reports and transaction history reports from within Salesforce. So our account managers, our salespeople can look and see, well, what are the invoices that are outstanding? So when they're having conversations with customers, they're equipped with the right information, and they're not having to ask finance or to wait for finance to come back with an answer. Everything is at their fingertips. And again, One of the things I didn't mention, and I probably should, is that there is a fixed price for this integration. So you're not paying per Salesforce user to give this access. And what it allows your sales and your account managers to do is to stay in their system. You're not having to swap between systems to get information. All of the relevant information for them is actually within the piece. So they can go onto a customer account, they can run a transaction history, run an age debt report, and understand actually what's happening with that account. Um, and we talked about Intacct Screens, but we've not only got sort of the invoice, the creation of the invoice screen, but I can go back into an invoice within Salesforce and pop open an invoice screen and actually see the invoice as if it was viewed within Intacct. And I can, if I want to, send and email that invoice out to the customer if I have permissions to do so. So again, if a customer phones up and says, well, the reason I haven't paid it, or you're speaking to that customer on the phone, say the reason I haven't paid that invoice is because I never received it, your team are then enabled to be able to just quickly go into the invoice in the system because they have visibility of it within Salesforce, view the invoice and email it out to the clients with the relevant information. Again, subject to conditions, but it's just another great way of making it a brilliant experience for your customer. We also have the ability to manage and customize this integration ourselves as consultants, but also you have it as Salesforce administrators or as owners of the Salesforce environment. So things like custom fields. So if you add a new field onto your customer accounts and you want that information across into Intacct, you can do it. You literally can just add in that field and then map it in, and it literally is so very easy to map it across. And very much like Salesforce, Sage Intacct has a whole customization layer that allows you to create custom fields on different objects, which is not always a common functionality in accounting systems. So we have that real flexibility, and we make it really, really easy to sync the fields from one system to another. So all you need to do is literally select the Intacct field, select the Salesforce field, decide on the sync directions. Is it bi-directional, one direction, and which is the master? And then it will be done. So, and then you can use, which is our next point, we can use that information in our reporting. So if we want to do profitability reporting by one of those custom fields, so maybe it's industry, maybe it's size of company. So we can push that data that's being collected by the marketing and sales team from Salesforce into Intacct and use it to build powerful reports that analyze our data and profitability and apply that knowledge within the system. Okay. So that was an incredibly quick run through the power of Sage, of the Sage Intacct and Salesforce connector. And hopefully this will give you a good sort of starter for 10 in terms of your journey into what it can do. Now, for those of you that are interested in exploring more, we have some workflow videos that I would recommend you look at. So we have one on the opportunity to invoice workflow, and we have one on the opportunity to contract workflow. So you can actually see step by step how Intacct, what Intacct shows and how it works. So that would be a great starter for 10 for anyone looking to explore. If you are using the NFP version, do reach out. I am currently working on some videos for that as well, so that you can see that in action, and I'm happy to do it. And if anyone is looking to explore Sage Intacct itself wider, we have some great on-demand material that you can access. So we have our general coffee break demo. We also have industry-specific demos for SaaS, for financial services, for professional services, as well, and NFP as well. So please do explore our website, www.itassolutions.co.uk, and you'll see it all in there. And if you actually just want to have a conversation with somebody, please do reach out to myself and one of the team. There's a couple of us Salesforce, I won't say gurus, but some of Salesforce aficionados that love working with Salesforce. So we're happy to talk through and chat about options and how the integration can work.